The sun had barely risen over King's Landing when Eddard Stark stood silently by the window of the Tower of the Hand. The paper in his hand, his final proof, Maester Pycelle's writings, the lineages, the black hair of Baratheon children, all screamed one truth. Joffrey, Tommen and Myrcella were not Robert's children. They were the products of Cersei's incest with her twin, Jaime. He had wrestled with this truth for days. Honor or politics. But after the poisoning of Jon Arryn and the ever-tightening Lannister grip, Ned knew he had no choice. His friend, Robert Baratheon, the king who once laughed too loud and drank too much, deserved to know the truth, no matter how it shattered his world. That very afternoon, Ned entered the Red Keep's hunting pavilion where Robert was preparing for his trip. Barrels of wine, roast meats and a host of whores buzzed around, but Ned's face was grave. It took Robert one look to know something was wrong. "Ned," Robert barked, brushing off a giggling girl. "You look like you swallowed a dagger." "We need to speak," Ned said, quiet but firm. Alone. Within minutes the pavilion was cleared. Only Robert and Ned remained. The wind flapped the tents, and outside, laughter echoed. But inside, silence ruled. "I know who Jon Arryn died for," Ned began. "He found something he wasn't meant to discover." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Spit it out." "Ned, stop dancing. Joffrey, Tommen, Myrcella, they're not your children." The words hit like a sword to the gut. Robert stared, unblinking, as though trying to make sense of a foreign language. "They belong to Jaime Lannister," Ned said. "Cersei's own brother." For a long time Robert didn't speak. His hand, which had been resting on a goblet, crushed it with such force that blood seeped from his palm. "Are you certain?" His voice was low, trembling with fury. "I unchecked the lineages. Baratheon blood always breeds black hair. All your bastards have it. But Cersei's children, all golden." Robert stood slowly, eyes burning. "I killed Rhaegar for less." Ned wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe denial, maybe a cry, but Robert was a storm. That night, Robert cancelled his hunt. He summoned the small council in secret. Ned stood by him, hand on Ice's hilt. Littlefinger sensed the tension and squirmed. Varys merely watched with his owl eyes. Renly, though surprised, kept quiet. When Robert declared his children illegitimate and Cersei a traitor, chaos erupted. "She's your queen!" Renly shouted. "She's a whore!" Robert snapped. "And her children are bastards!" "I will not have a Targaryen reborn in golden hair." But it wasn't that simple. The Lannisters were no fools. Cersei had already heard rumors of Ned's digging. She had prepared. And when Robert tried to arrest her that very night, he found the queen had disappeared from the Red Keep with all 3 children and Jaime at her side. The lioness had fled. What followed was not swift justice, but a kingdom, breaking at the seams. Tywin Lannister did not wait for negotiations. He took it as war. From Casterly Rock, he unleashed 20,000 men toward King's Landing. Jaime, dubbed the Kingslayer once more, vowed to take the Iron Throne by fire and force, not to defend Cersei, but to put his blood on the throne. Robert, betrayed and burning with wrath, called his banners. The War of the Crowned Bastards had begun, and amidst it all, Ned Stark stood in the middle. He had chosen truth, but truth in Westeros was often more dangerous than a lie. The streets whispered, the nobles watched, the swords unsheathed, and the Iron Throne once again was stained with the promise of blood. When the sun rose over King's Landing the next day, it brought with it a heavy silence. The kind that presses down on people's chests before a storm breaks. Market stalls stood half abandoned, children were ushered indoors, and whispers filled every tavern. The banners of House Lannister still fluttered from towers, but now they bore an ominous weight, not of noble pride, but of vengeance. The truth was out. The Queen and her children were declared illegitimate, the capital on edge. and war had already begun to breathe through the cracks of peace. King Robert Baratheon had locked himself inside his private chambers. He refused audiences, drank endlessly, and stared into the flames like they could burn the memories from his skull. "I loved her once," he muttered to Ned, who stood quietly nearby. "She reminded me of Lyanna for a heartbeat. I built a kingdom on that lie." Ned didn't respond. What could he say? That Cersei never loved him? That her love belonged to her brother? No truth could ease the humiliation Robert carried now. A king, deceived. A man, broken. But war didn't wait for broken men to mend. Varys, silent as ever, brought news. "The Queen has fled with her children. Jaime rode with her. They've taken the old smuggler's route through the Blackwater. They're headed west. Casterly Rock," Ned said grimly. Robert's eyes burned. "Then we burn it." But Tywin Lannister had already moved. From the golden halls of Casterly Rock, he had raised an army 20,000 strong, not to defend, but to conquer. The insult to his family's name demanded blood, and for once the old lion moved with terrifying speed. Within days, raven after raven arrived with dire messages. Lannister forces had already crossed the Riverlands. Lord Tywin had sent a brutal message by razing several Tully villages, not for strategy, but for vengeance. "You take my grandchildren's crown," his message read. "I'll take your realm." Meanwhile, Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, had not returned to the Rock. Instead, he had taken a bold step. He turned east with a strike force of his most elite knights, heading toward Harrenhal. His goal was simple: carve a new power, base in the Riverlands, and then march on King's Landing. Robert had no choice. He called his banners, all of them. Storm's End, the Vale, the North. Stannis Baratheon returned from Dragonstone cold and full of silent fury. "You let her live," he said to Robert. "You let your pride blind you, and now we face ruin." Renly, on the other hand, saw opportunity. "People want a gentle king," he told Sir Loras Tyrell in private. "Someone who smiles, someone they can follow." But Ned Stark was already preparing for a different kind of war. He wrote to Robb in Winterfell, urging him to prepare the North for conflict. "If we fall," he wrote, "Winterfell must stand strong." Catelyn, who had arrived in the capital a week prior to speak on Tyrion's capture at the Eyrie, now found herself trapped between the politics of war and her own sister's fury. "The Lannisters killed Jon Arryn," Lysa insisted. "They poisoned him, and now they'll kill the realm," Catelyn replied, "unless someone stops them." That someone became clearer each day, but it wasn't just banners and swords being moved, it was people's loyalties. The small council fractured. Littlefinger, ever the schemer, promised support, but secretly began aligning himself with whoever would offer him more. Varys watched everything but offered nothing. Grand Maester Pycelle? He wept when Cersei fled, then fell sick, unable to face the storm he helped unleash. One evening, as the bells tolled the hour, Ned Stark stood atop the Red Keep, watching smoke rise from the western horizon. "They're not wasting time," he said to Sir Barristan Selmy, "and neither can we." "The king needs you," Barristan said. "He listens to no one else." But that was the problem. Robert had stopped listening altogether. His rage had consumed him, and rage makes a poor ruler. That night, Ned took the sword ice to the Godswood and knelt. He prayed not for victory, but for clarity, for strength, and the wind answered with silence. Unseen by all, far to the west, Tywin Lannister gathered his war council. "We do not fight for Cersei," he told his men. "We fight for legacy. If we lose now, the lion becomes a memory." Beside him, Cersei watched quietly, her eyes colder than the steel on Jaime's hip. "They'll never let my children live," she said. "Not now." "No," Tywin replied, "which is why we killed them first." The first blood was spilled not in battle, but in a corridor of the Red Keep. One of the king's royal guards, Sir Meryn Trant, known for his silence and loyalty, was found dead in a storage room near the throne hall, his throat slit. No gold cloak saw anything, no servants heard anything, and yet his sword was gone. That same night, a raven never reached Riverrun. It had been intercepted mid-air. This was not war by army. This was war by shadow. Ned knew the Lannisters had eyes everywhere. With Cersei gone, Jaime hiding in the Riverlands, and Tywin moving troops like chess pieces, it was only a matter of time before someone tried to silence him too. So he doubled his guards. He trusted only Ser Barristan, Arya's dancing master, Syrio Forel, and 2 northern men who'd come down with him from Winterfell. Meanwhile, chaos had begun to ripple through the capital. Gold cloaks were split in loyalty. Some remained true to Robert. Others had been quietly bribed by Littlefinger, who, as always, played both sides. One afternoon, Ned called Littlefinger to his chamber. He had enough of the man's smirks and games. "Whose side are you on?" Ned demanded. Littlefinger only smiled. "I'm on the side of the realm. You've played both ends long enough. I'll not have you slither through this war, then slit my throat," Littlefinger whispered, leaning close. "But when this is over, you'll wish you had my help." Ned let him go, for now, but his patience was wearing thinner than the veil of peace left in the city. Outside the Red Keep, things were even worse. Fleets of small folk began fleeing the city. Word had reached the streets that the Lannisters were moving east, and that King's Landing would soon burn. Riots broke out in Flea Bottom. A baker was hanged for charging 3 times his usual price. A Tyrell envoy was stoned to death by a mob who thought them Lannister spies. And in the midst of this madness, Cersei made her first move. A letter arrived, not to Robert, but to the High Septon. In it, Cersei accused Ned Stark of treason, of manipulating the king, of forging lineage documents, and attempting to place his own bloodline on the throne. She demanded the Faith look into these false accusations made against the rightful queen and her children, and she signed it boldly. Cersei of House Lannister, true queen of the 7 kingdoms. The letter spread like wildfire, and the court, already crumbling, turned on itself. Some lords whispered that maybe Ned had lied. Others feared the Lannisters more than the truth. The Faith militant began roaming the streets again, encouraged by the High Septon, who saw this moment as a chance to seize moral power. Robert, in all of this, stayed in his chambers. He drank until his skin turned blotchy, his speech slurred. Only Ned visited him, trying to shake the king back to life. "We don't have time for this," Ned growled. Robert laughed bitterly. "You gave me the truth, Ned, and now I can't sleep without seeing her face. I see her with him, my own brother-in-law, in my bed. And if you don't act," Ned warned, "you'll see the Lannister lion flying over the Red Keep." That night Robert finally woke up. He stood, called for Ser Barristan, and summoned his armor. "Call the banners again," he said. "We ride to Harrenhal. If Jaime Lannister wants a war, we'll give him one." But Ned was uneasy. "And what of your heir?" Robert paused. That was the problem. Joffrey was not his. Tommen and Myrcella were not his true-born heir, Stannis. But Robert had never loved him. "Stannis is cold," Robert said, "but maybe that's what the realm needs." Still, whispers of Renly's intentions had grown louder. He had vanished from the capital 2 nights ago with Sir Loras and 50 men. South, perhaps, or west, no one knew. But the crown had more than one claimant now, and worse, more than one army. Ned feared the realm would soon face not just a war between Lannister and Baratheon, but a war within House Baratheon itself. And far to the north, in Winterfell, young Robb Stark sat with the raven from his father in one hand and his sword in the other. He read the words over and over. "If I fall, Winterfell must hold. Do not trust the lion. Do not trust the snake." Robb's eyes darkened. "Send ravens," he said. "We call our banners." The north would march, the south would burn, and in the Riverlands, Jaime Lannister stood in the ruined hall of Harrenhal, smiling as black crows perched on broken beams above. "Let the stag come," he said. "I'm ready." It began with thunder, not from the sky, but from the ground. Hooves, thousands of them. Robert Baratheon, finally roused from wine and sorrow, marched toward Harrenhal at the head of 15,000 men. Stormlanders, Reach bannermen still loyal to the crown, and the last core of the royal army. Ned Stark rode beside him, armored. In the cold grey steel of the north, the great sword Ice strapped to his back. His face was grim, his thoughts heavy. Behind them followed Sir Barristan Selmy, dour and silent, and Stannis Baratheon, riding like a shadow, his face clenched in fury at the dishonour to House Baratheon's name. "I should be your heir," Stannis growled one night by the campfire. "Not Joffrey, not Renly, me." "I never said otherwise," Robert muttered. "But the gods gave me fools for brothers." Across the kingdoms, the banners flew. In the north, the direwolf of House Stark marched. In the Vale, House Arryn remained cold and silent, with Lysa refusing to send a single soldier, consumed by her own fear and grief. But in the Riverlands, chaos reigned. House Tully had found itself in the direct path of the Lannister wrath. Jaime had taken Harrenhal swiftly and then moved south, burning and pillaging every village that had sworn. To Riverrun, Lord Hoster Tully, sick and aging, had barricaded himself inside the castle with every archer he could summon, while Catelyn, still stranded in King's Landing, begged Ned to protect her family. It was a plea Ned didn't take lightly. Robert's army closed in on Harrenhal. They found not a fortress, but a trap. On the third night of camp, just beyond the God's Eye, their forward scouts returned in pieces, literally, heads in sacks, fingers in satchels. The Lannister message was clear. Mercy would not be given. The next morning, battle erupted. Jaime Lannister rode out in golden armor, leading a vanguard of 2,000 elite knights. They struck like lightning at the left flank of Robert's line, cutting through foot soldiers like wheat. Sir Barristan countered with a charge of his own, the King's Guard slashing a silver path through the battlefield. Ned saw Jaime only once that day, across a field of corpses, laughing as he skewered a knight with one hand and held his helm in the other. Robert fought like a beast. Drunk on rage, he smashed men apart with his warhammer. Blood splashed across his face, and his roars turned the battlefield into a slaughter. For one terrifying moment, it felt like the old Robert had returned, the man who had broken Rhaegar, Targaryen at the trident. But Jaime was no fool. As Robert charged deeper into the enemy line, Jaime pulled back, luring the king away from his guards, into a killing ground. Ned saw it too late. By the time he fought his way through 3 Lannister guards, Robert was down. His horse had collapsed, an arrow buried deep in its eye. The king struggled to rise, roaring curses, his hammer heavy in his hands, and then Jaime appeared. "You killed my honor when you took my sister," Robert spat, his mouth bloody. "And you killed mine the day you made her your queen." Jaime replied and charged. What followed wasn't a duel, it was desperation. Robert swung with fury, but he was tired, slower than the Jaime of today. Jaime danced around him, his sword flicking like a serpent. It didn't take long. A slice to the leg, a stab to the shoulder. And then, the moment, Jaime's sword at Robert's throat, but he didn't strike. "I want you alive," he whispered, "so you can watch what I do to your kingdom." Then he knocked the king out cold with a pommel blow. By the time Ned reached them, Jaime was gone, vanished into the chaos. Lannister forces had begun to retreat, vanishing back into the swamps beyond Harrenhal, leaving fire and destruction in their wake. Robert lay unconscious, bleeding, alive, but barely. That night, Ned sat alone in Robert's tent. He looked at his old friend, bandaged and pale, and wondered if the realm had already lost. Back in King's Landing, word of Robert's fall spread like rot. The gold cloaks, unsure of who lived and who ruled, turned to the only man left in the Red Keep with power, Peter Baelish. Littlefinger smiled as he received the raven. "It begins," he said, and far away on the high seas, Renly Baratheon sailed toward Highgarden with a single question in his heart. If Robert was weak and Stannis was unloved, then why not him? Word of Robert's defeat at Harrenhal moved faster than any raven. It flew across kingdoms like the wind. The king had fallen, the king had fallen. Not dead, not yet, but broken. And to many lords, a broken king was no king at all. In King's Landing, the Red Keep was a powder keg. The throne stood cold and empty, and each noble who passed it eyed it for a second too long. Stannis had locked himself in his chamber, demanding that the High Septon anoint him as heir. "The line of succession is clear," he told the council. "Joffrey is no son of Robert. Tommen, Myrcella, bastards of incest. I am next." But no one answered him. Varys vanished. Pycelle fumbled and coughed, avoiding the topic. And Littlefinger? Littlefinger smiled. He had already started whispering in the ears of other lords. Wouldn't Renly make a better king? Handsome, young, loved by the people, and with Highgarden behind him. Across the sea in Highgarden, Renly had arrived. The Tyrells, cautious as always, listened carefully. Mace Tyrell was skeptical, but his daughter Margaery watched Renly with a quiet hunger. "A king who needs a queen," she said softly to her father, "is a king we can control." Within weeks, 100 ships were being prepared at Brightwater Keep. The banners of House Tyrell were unfurled. The Baratheon brothers were at war now, and the Reach had picked its side. But while lords and nobles squabbled over crowns, a different storm brewed in the north. Winterfell had changed. Robb Stark stood in his father's solar, the letter from the south clutched in his hand. He read it again, even though he already knew every word. Robert wounded. Jaime fled. The kingdom burning beside him. Catelyn held her breath. "You don't have to go," she said. "I do," Robb replied. "Your father didn't ask for war." "No," he said quietly, "but war came anyway." Robb wasn't the boy of summer anymore. He'd seen too many ravens, too many broken seals. The stories he'd grown up hearing of honor, of justice, of kings and lords doing right, they meant little now. He summoned the bannermen, House Umber, House Karstark, House Mormont. One by one, the great houses of the north answered. They brought swords, men, banners, and fury. Robb led 20,000 Northerners out of Winterfell. It was no longer just about his father. It was about the south bleeding the north dry again, and Robb Stark, Lord of Winterfell, marched not to bend the knee, but to remind the realm that the north remembers. Back in King's Landing, the court began to fracture fully. Joffrey, barely 14, sat on the throne for a brief session of court. He screamed at his council, ordered beatings for trivial insults, and demanded to know why his father hadn't returned to the capital in glory. When Pycelle tried to explain, Joffrey slapped him. Cersei, still in hiding but sending messages. Through loyalists, had her own orders: protect the children at all costs, do not let them be taken. She knew what Robert would do if he ever awoke. She knew what Stannis would demand, so she did what only a Lannister could do. She paid bribes. She bought loyalties, she promised gold, land, marriages, and she waited for her father, Tywin, to finish preparing his next move, because Tywin Lannister was not a man who reacted. He calculated, he waited, and now he was ready. From Casterly Rock, another raven flew. Not to the Baratheons, not to the Starks, but to the Iron Islands. Balon Greyjoy received it with a scowl. He read the words 3 times, then looked to his son Theon, who had been raised by Ned Stark like a wolf among wolves. "The lions want our sails," Balon said. "They want us to strike the north while it's bare. No Starks in Winterfell, only old men and children. And will we?" Theon asked. Balan looked out at the sea. The Kraken doesn't ask. It takes. Another front of the war had just opened. Ned Stark, meanwhile, remained at Robert's side in a hastily set-up encampment near Harrenhal. The king had finally stirred, coughing blood, fever burning his skin. "They'll tear each other apart." Robert groaned. "They already are," Ned replied. "Then you must choose," Robert said. "Stannis or Renly?" "I choose the realm," Ned said. "And right now the realm needs peace, not more kings." But Robert only laughed, bitter and broken. "Then you've already lost." That night, Ned wrote again, not to Robb, not to Stannis, but to Daenerys Targaryen across the narrow sea. "If Westeros falls into chaos," he wrote, "you may be its last hope." He hesitated over the seal, and then pressed it closed. Winter had not come, not yet, but its shadow loomed. The northern host, 20,000 strong, had reached the twins. Robb Stark, barely more than a boy by age but already a man by war, stared at the muddy waters of the Green Fork and realized that everything he'd been raised to believe about justice, honor, and peace had drowned the moment his father sent that letter. House Frey opened the gates, but not for free. Walder Frey, old and sneering, demanded marriage alliances. Robb gave his word, half a promise, half a trap, but his eyes never left the faces of the Frey sons, each one more rat-like than the last. Behind Robb rode the fury of the North, and with it, a single mission: get to Riverrun, break the Lannister siege, and show the South that the wolves still had teeth. But time was running short. At Harrenhal, Robert Baratheon awoke again, this time fully conscious, broken in body, but clear in mind. "Where's Jaime?" he rasped. "Gone," Ned replied. "Slipped through the swamps. Coward," Robert spat. "I should have killed him the day he knelt after Aerys." "We should have done many things," Ned said. Robert turned his head, eyes sunken. "The realm needs peace, and I gave it." Ned said nothing, because it was already too late for peace. Dews came fast, and every raven brought blood. Renly had crowned himself king at Bitterbridge. With Mace Tyrell and 50,000 soldiers behind him, he had declared Stannis a relic of cold law and Robert a relic of the past. "The future is me," Renly said. "A king who smiles, a king the people want." Stannis, of course, would never allow it. He left King's Landing the moment he heard. No ceremony, no declaration, just fire in his eyes and ships under his feet. Davos Seaworth sailed beside him, and behind them a new figure, Melisandre of Ashai, a red priestess who whispered of shadows, flames, and a single true king, chosen by fire. Meanwhile, in the Westerlands, Tywin Lannister struck. He had made his deal with Balon Greyjoy, and the Krakens had risen. They fell upon the Norths, undefended coasts like a tide of iron and fire. Deepwood Motte burned, Torrhen Square was sacked, and the dread fort. Silent Theon Greyjoy, once a ward of Ned Stark, stood atop the smoking ramparts of Winterfell, a grey cloak flapping behind him. The Starks were gone. The wolves were south, and Theon had chosen his blood. "I am no Stark," he whispered. "Not anymore." Back in King's Landing, Joffrey tried to sit the throne. Again. But no one knelt. The High Septon declared the throne unclaimed, and the small council dissolved into factions. Littlefinger disappeared with half the treasury. Varys left whispers in the dark and fled into shadow. The capital began to starve, and then the final blow came. From across the sea, a letter arrived. Sealed with a red dragon, Daenerys Targaryen had crossed the narrow sea. With her came not armies, but 3 dragons, small, hungry, and growing. She wrote not to demand the throne, but to remind the realm that Targaryen blood still flowed, and Westeros, weak, divided, bleeding, listened. In the Riverlands, Robb Stark finally broke the siege of Riverrun. His uncle Edmure blooded, but alive, knelt to him in the hall. The banners of House Lannister were torn down and burned. Jaime Lannister was captured trying to retreat west, surrounded by Stark men. Robb faced him in chains. "You started this war," Robb said. Jaime only grinned. "Your father told the truth, and the realm punished him for it. He's still alive, for now." And back at Harrenhal, Ned Stark sat beside Robert Baratheon one final time. "You have to return to King's Landing," Robert said. "You have to take the crown." "I don't want the crown." "None of us did," Robert muttered. "But if you don't take it, someone worse will." Robert died that night, quietly. No war horns, no cries, just a wheeze, a breath, and then silence. Ned stood over his body and knew. Truth had broken. A king. And now it might break the world. When he returned to the capital, the city was already splitting apart. Fires burned in Flea Bottom. The gold cloaks had no master. The throne stood bare, 1,000 blades cold and silent, and the people waited for a king or a conqueror. Ned stood before the throne, ice at his side. He did not sit. He simply turned and walked away. Let the others play the game. Let them fight. For crowns, the North would remember, and winter would have the last word.